Hello and welcome to another edition of the SpareTime podcast with me, Nigel Marston, and him, Ben Marston. And it's sponsored by ADR Wear, who is responsible for these beautiful t-shirts. Well, this is not beautiful. This is green, so nothing green is beautiful, except grass, of course. So on this edition of the SpareTime podcast, our guest today is Verity Crawley. So hello, Verity, and welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. It's a privilege to be able to speak to you. Well, we've got quite a few questions we want to ask you, especially with you being probably one of the few British guests that we've had from over on the other side of the pond there. And so I'm going to kick off and ask you how you got started in bowling. Where did it all start?
I started when I was 5, so it feels like a long time ago now. I'm 29 right now. I started back in the UK. I joined a youth bowling club when I was 5, myself and my older brother, who is 5 years older than me. We both joined together, and I don't exactly know how that happened. I know that he had gone to a birthday party and really enjoyed bowling. And as far as I'm aware, there was the youth bowling club going on at the same time. And my parents signed us up to give us something, I guess, to do and see if we would enjoy it. And we obviously did. The rest kind of feels like history, right? Like I've just continued to bowl and bowl and bowl. But I was very fortunate as a junior bowler in the UK to have a lot of events to compete in. I used to travel with the youth bowling club to bowl, national south of England. And then I was invited when I was 12 to be a part of Jets, which at the time was the junior team in England training squad. And it was a 4-year program to where I want to say it was once a month we would travel and all get together. But now I don't exactly remember the exact time frame or how long it would happen for. But that was a huge thing for me from a coaching standpoint, and also having the opportunity to compete at the highest level and learn from some of those coaches. So I was always working on my game. I had some very good coaching aside from the Team England squad. Zara Glover, Steve Thornton, John Zadell were some of my coaches that I had growing up. And to me, they have been some of the best coaches in the UK. So I'm very fortunate that I always had guidance. And I think that's one of the reasons that I like to believe my physical game is pretty good now. And I think that is due to them. So I used to bowl all over the UK, travel most weekends, and then I moved to the US actually when I was 18 to study at university.
Yeah, I mean the journey of driving around all over the country every weekend. I mean that's something that we tend to do as well. And at what point did you feel that bowling was going to become more than just something you were doing with a YBC? When did you start to realize that this is going to get serious?
I actually don't know. It was one of those things that growing up, there wasn't much information about professional bowling. I personally didn't watch professional bowling, right? YouTube wasn't as big of a thing. So I wasn't really very aware of what that next level was. So for me, I just really enjoyed bowling. And all I wanted to do was continue bowling. I didn't know where that was going to take me. I've always had a dream of becoming a world champion, but that was from every year I wanted to make Team England. Every year I was doing the qualifications to try and make Team England. I never knew about the whole professional side of things. So I don't really know when I realized, I would say. I had a lot of struggles in my junior career in terms of I didn't win very much. I had a lot of instances where I didn't make Team England. I was either 6th and they took top 5, or I made the training squad, but I didn't get picked. And although I think that helped me become a better bowler when I look back on it, I think that made it harder for me to know that I was good, because I kept having these instances where I didn't perform well, or I just missed a cut, or just missed making the team.
So what was the catalyst for you going to the US at the age of 18, which is a fairly young age?
So I bowled a European Youth Championships. It was my first EYC that I bowled for Team England, and it was my last eligibility one. So I was 17 at the time. I couldn't bowl anymore. I got selected and I performed really well. I won some medals. I shot my first 300. So it was a really successful event. And from that, I had quite a few coaches from the US that reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in studying at their university. At the time, that had been done a few times by some British bowlers, so I was already aware that there was a pathway there, but it's not something I'd considered. Like, for me, moving 4,000 miles away from home, like, it just wasn't something that I thought that I was going to do. However, I never knew what I wanted to do growing up, right? You know how everyone, they get to 16, 17 and you start thinking about the future, and most people know what they want to study at university. I had no idea. So I had applied to quite a few universities back home in the UK, and I was only actually accepted into one. So I had one offer and I was going. I'd always told myself that I needed to further my career and I would need to study at university. So that's what I was set on. But then after bowling this European Youth Championships and being contacted by some coaches, everything kind of changed. I had a few programs that honestly I wasn't very interested in going to, but then I heard from Weber International, who train at the Kegel Training Center. And for me, I was thinking, I can train at Kegel and I get to be in Florida, which is sunny, which is way better than being in England. Maybe I should look into it. So I started to do more research into the program and whether it would be possible. And I spoke to a lot of people within the bowling world in the UK to kind of ask them, like, should I do it? Because I had no idea. Like, yes, I wanted to take my game to the next level, but it's a pretty big change moving countries. And everyone that I spoke to said that I would regret it if I didn't try it, and I can always come home. And I think that was one of the most, like, I don't know, it was a nice feeling to know that I could go for 2 months, hate it, and turn right back around and come home. Like, I'm always going to have a place for me in England. So in that sense, it was like, I would be silly not to try it. So that was how the opportunity really happened. I was offered a scholarship to be able to go to Weber International and study there for 4 years, which I ended up doing the full 4 years. I didn't turn around and hate it and come home. And so much so that I feel like I've had so many opportunities for bowling since then that I'm still in the US.
So what's the barriers for somebody coming from the UK going into university education in the US? Because it's a lot more expensive there than it is in the UK.
Yeah, it is and it isn't, because there are a lot of different scholarships available. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people in the UK don't realize, is that there is money, there is, availability to have a scholarship. You might still be paying some, but you would still be paying some if you're studying in the UK too. So obviously it is more complicated because there are the expenses of flights, and then you have to get a visa. So there are other elements that do make it tricky, but I think that a lot of people don't look into it because they think it's too difficult. But at the same time, there's been a lot of people that have done it and shown that it is doable.
Yeah. So, and at college, what would you say was for college bowling? What would you say was your greatest achievement in collegiate bowling?
Definitely winning the national championship. My senior year, we won the intercollegiate team championship, which is the end goal for every collegiate program, is they want to win that championship. So I think the fact that I did that in my senior year, we had already won the NAIA national championship twice before, but that's not seen, or at the time it wasn't seen as big of a thing as the USBC ITCs. So that definitely had to be one of the biggest achievements.
Okay, what were you studying?
I studied sports business management, and I was not very aware of things moving from the UK to the US in the sense of how the education worked. But for anyone who is looking at maybe moving to the US to study, I think it's important to know that whatever you choose as your major going into it, you can change. So that first year of university in the US is not very focused on your specific major. So it gives you the opportunity to be able to try some different classes and maybe change your major. That was something that I didn't really know. And the other thing that I'd wish I'd really known is that you can do a minor as well. So you can have a minor in something else. That was something that I didn't do, but come maybe my senior year, when I realized that that could have been possible, I wish that I'd have done that.
Okay, and what point during the time that you were at university there in the US did you think, maybe maybe I'll stay here or will I go home? When did you decide what the next step was? I mean, presumably
I
when you first went there, you were assuming you're going to come back home in 4 years' time.
Yeah, I still assume that I'm going to come back home, right? I still have this mindset of I'm coming home, I'm coming home. I would say going into my third year, so my junior year of university, I knew that I was going to stay one extra year. And the reason for that is from a visa perspective. As you are there for your 4 years, you have a student visa. You then have an opportunity to do what's called an OPT for an extra year after your college degree. And that allows you to work in your field. So whatever you studied, you can get a job within that field, and it gives you a year of work experience. So for me, I thought 100%, like, I'll do my 4 years, and then I will do this extra year and try and work in the US to get some experience. And then I always envisioned myself going home.
And what
Just
happened at
hasn't
that
turned out
point?
that way.
What,
What happened at that point
yeah.
was in my senior year and my year after, I bowled some PWBA events as an amateur. And I realized how much I enjoyed it and how much I wanted to bowl the women's tour. So my first 2 years of my collegiate career, the PWBA wasn't around. There was no professional tour for the women. But in my junior year, I think it was in my junior year, the PWBA came back. So for that time frame, I was able to see all of this competing happening during the summer by the women. So I decided to bowl some events. You can bowl some where you don't have to have your professional card in order to bowl some. So I did that just to kind of, get my toes wet, see what it felt like, see whether I enjoyed it. And I really did. And whilst I was working on my OPT, I was fortunate enough to be able to bowl the maximum amount of events that I could bowl without having to get my card. There are certain rules in place when you're an amateur and how much you're allowed to cash. And after doing that, it made me realize that I wanted to bowl the full tour. Like, I wanted to try basically becoming a professional bowler. And the best way to do that was to get a visa that would allow me to stay in the US and compete. So I also decided if I'm going to do that, then I should continue working in the US. So I actually got a job as an assistant coach at the Savannah College of Art and Design. And I was able to do that and bowl at the same time. So I had a 9-month contract with the university, which allowed me 3 months to bowl the women's tour during the summer. I felt like I wouldn't be able to sustain myself if I was just a full-time professional bowler. At that time, I felt like I need a job. I need to have a stable income. And again, visa is a whole nother issue that comes into it. So for me, the best thing was to be able to work and then bowl the women's tour on the side. So at that point, once I got all of that sorted, well, now I'm locked into a job in the US and I'm bowling the women's tour. So I'm certainly not moving home anytime soon. And then I actually stopped coaching in 2020. I decided to leave the university and go full time and kind of do what I didn't think I would be able to do, in the sense of bowl full time for a living.
So presumably SCAD sponsored you, which enabled you to get the visa, right?
Kind of. I had an athlete visa, but it was signed off by SCAD. So it wasn't like a work visa. It's a bit hard to explain. Like, it was technically a work visa, but the visa was based off my athletic ability.
Right, I see. Yeah. So that's always a question that we've had when we see British bowlers going over to the US, because there's been somebody who's got friends in the US and goes there regularly. I know it's not the sort of place you can just go to and live. It's not as simple as that. So to get the visa, there's lots of hoops to jump through, and I know that sponsorship by an employer is one of those. But so an athlete's visa, how does athlete's visas actually work?
There are two different types of athlete visas. There is one that is tied to a person or an organization, and that is almost where that person or organization is sponsoring you to say, hey, they are working for me, but they are an athlete, they have this ability. And then the other one is more of a travel athlete visa, to where you are coming in to the country in order to bowl competitive events and earn prize money. So there are those two different options. Either way, you have to prove to the government that you are at the highest level in your sport and that you have this basically an extraordinary ability within your sport. Because the way the government look at it is, I, from the UK, am taking away a place of an American citizen. So I have to prove that I am essentially good enough to be in the country. So there is a lot of documentation that goes into it. I had to have a lot of evidence letters from people within the bowling industry in order to prove that, you know, I am at the top of my game and I deserve to have this athlete visa.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds quite subjective, that you've got to prove that you're at the top of your game, because it's, a lot depends on people's judgment.
100%. And again, bowling is it's not a mainstream sport in the sense of not everybody understands it. So it becomes even harder to apply for because our ranking systems are a little bit different. We have a European tour at the time. We had a world bowling tour, then we had the PWBA. So it became a little bit confusing. So being able to put all of that information together for a government official who doesn't understand anything about bowling, that's what makes it a little bit complicated at times. But a lot of the bowlers have been successful and have the visas that are allowing them to come into the country and compete.
Okay, and now you explained what major you did when you were at university. That makes sense, because one thing I've noticed about you is you seem very business focused. I know of a lot of PBA bowlers, and but I think for me, you appear to be one of the most business focused PBA bowlers out there. And I mean, your website, I love your website. I think the design of that's fantastic. It's really modern, it's professional, it's clean. And it's unusual to see that level of commercial acumen within a PBA bowler.
Yeah, I think for me there is a brand involved, right? So I am now bowling full time for a living. So I earn my money through tournaments, but there has to be another element of it because my women's tour is only really 3 months during the summer. So I have 9 months of what do I do, right? I have to earn money somehow. And for me, I believe in the fact that I should have a brand. So I did, I created a website, I created a logo. I tried to have this brand that is me and who I am as a bowler.
Where do you based in the US?
Say that again.
Where you're based in the US normally? Where do you spend most
Florida.
of your time? In Florida. Well, that makes sense because of the weather.
Yes. Yeah, and actually I'm still based around Kegel. So where I was when I studied at Weber, I am still around that area because I believed that the reason that I'm in the US is so that I can improve from a bowling standpoint, right? The reason I make this sacrifice of not being in the UK and being in the US is so that I can perform at the best of my abilities. And in order to do that, I need to be in the best place to help me. And I firmly believe that Kegel and the resources that Kegel have allow me to learn the most and better myself the most. So that's why when I was coaching at SCAD and I decided to leave, I moved back to Florida to have the opportunity to constantly be around Kegel.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question before I hand over to Ben. Watching your social media, you always seem to be in some different country in the world. If you're not in, I think it's Estonia or Australia or wherever, how do you manage to travel so much?
I really enjoy travel. That's something that it gives me a lot of joy. And not to say that I don't love the US, because obviously I do, but I have such a connection to Europe that when I am not competing during my summers, I want to be able to experience bowling in other countries. And that's really why. And then there's some trips that I do that are purely coaching trips because I want to be able to grow the sport and give back everything that I am learning and everything that I have learned. I want to be able to share with other people. So some of those trips that I might take internationally are also just to share my knowledge.
And you bowled on a cruise ship. I mean, that must have been a weird experience.
It was very different. It was a very humbling experience, and it made you realize that when you get back to a regular bowling environment, it feels so much easier because you at least know what your bowling ball is going to do. Bowling on the cruise ship, you had no idea. I would try and throw my ball straight down the middle and it would back up because the cruise ship was turning and it affected the ball motion. So it was very fun, very different, but I would do it again.
Sure, Ben's got a question now.
Yeah, you have blaming the approaches and then you've got the fact that you want a sideways slant.
Exactly. And a lot of people didn't believe it. A lot of people, it was thought, at least the video that I posted, a lot of people thought it was me just throwing the ball that way. I'm like, I was doing everything I could to try and get that ball just to go straight down the lane, but I couldn't.
It's like typography on steroids.
Hmm.
So, I looked at your website quite a bit, and one thing that stood out to me, and from the stuff I've seen off you, is your outlook on the game and how you sort of improve. It's not something that you come across very often. Obviously, there's a lot of people that go, I want to be as good as I can, and I want to be, the best bowler I can, and go as far as I can. But the way you do that is different. And there's a quote on your website that says, "There are no failures, only continuous opportunities to learn and improve." And I really like that quote and your outlook. And I just want to sort of try and understand where this outlook came from and how it's helped you.
No, fantastic question. For me, that all comes from my youth career, right? Because I had a lot of ups and downs. I would say that I experienced more heartbreak than I did success when I was younger. And in the moment, it infuriated me. In the moment, it made me feel like I wasn't a good bowler at all. However, it pushed me to continue working and to get better. And I think that's where it's come from now. And again, I've been this way for a few years, but I have realized how much the process is more important than anything. And that if you continue along that process, it's going to benefit you more in the long run than if you don't. So even my first couple of years on tour, I made quite a few TV shows in my first year and I didn't win. And I used to beat myself up thinking that, I wasn't a good bowler and I'm never going to win. And I went through a lot with that, but it's made me realize that it actually helped me by not winning, because it's allowed me to figure out what do I need, right? And what do I need to get better? What do I need to work on? What do I need to improve on? So I do think that we learn so much more from the bad events than we do from the good events. And an example of that is my tour season last year. I had one of my worst events ever at USBC Queens. I don't remember what place I finished, but it was just really, really bad. I didn't make the cut and I was a little distraught. I thought, what have I been doing? Why have I been working so hard to come to this event and absolutely bomb it? And then the next event, I came back and I won. And just that to me is crazy, right? And it shows that you can have and be at the bottom of what you feel like, rock bottom is, but then there's always going to be a way out of that. And that's where I feel like those really hard events and the ones that you could say are unsuccessful are the ones that you get more information from and you learn from so that you can come back and be stronger from it.
I feel like it's that blind belief of, well, I might be bowling bad now, but in however long it'll get better, and it's sort of part of the journey. I mean, there's definitely times for me personally where you've bowled and you're kind of like, what have I done? I've bowled terribly, and you question your own ability. But it's like, I think there was an analogy that says like 30% of the time you'll be questioning like what's going on. 20% of the time you'll be thinking that you should be bowling better, and 40% of the time you're working on being better, and 10% of the time you're actually doing as well as you think you should. And I feel like if you can keep the outlook that you've got on your bowling journey and actually enjoy just bowling and going to these different places, it helps a lot as a bowler. And I think what I've noticed with you is because you're so in love with that journey, whenever you go away, whether you bowl good or bad, you always look forward to either bettering it or doing the same.
Yeah, and I think another important element with that is you have to remind yourself that it is only bowling. So in a way, of course, I do it for a living, and I realistically I don't eat if I don't make the money, because that's how I earn my living. But at the same time, if we put so much pressure on ourselves to perform, the likelihood is you're not going to perform as well. So for me, I have to find enjoyment in more things than just bowling when I'm at those events. So I will, try and do a little bit of sightseeing if I'm going somewhere new. I will try and enjoy the environment that I'm in, because there is more to life than just bowling.
Have you ever sort of worked with a mental coach or anything like that, or did you kind of just develop your outlook from your own experience?
So when I was really young, I had a sports psychologist, and it was actually thanks to my parents. They saw how much I was struggling when I wasn't making Team England, and I worked with him for about 2 years in order to. The goal working with him was to make Team England. At the point, I didn't really realize how important the mental game was. And yes, I took it seriously. I did everything that he asked of me, but I didn't truly understand the importance of it. Then when I moved to the US and I bowled for Weber, we would have a mental game coach that would come in and work with the team. So I experienced kind of the team mental side of things. And now that I bowl individually on the PWBA, I do have my own sports psychologist that I work with. And I believe that it is really important. I started getting really into the mental game probably my second year on the women's tour, because I realized not how bad my mental game was, but I just realized that I had a lot of thoughts that I didn't really know what to do with, and I didn't know how to control them. So I started reading a lot of mental game books to get a deeper understanding of what can I do? How can I channel these thoughts? How can I react to these thoughts? And then from there, I felt like I still needed someone to be able to talk with, whether that be about goal setting or things that are going on in my mind. So I do actually work with a sports psychologist from the UK.
I suppose, firstly, you mentioned that you've read a lot of books. What type of books would you recommend to someone who's looking to improve their mental game?
My absolute favorite is called With Winning in Mind. That's the only mental game book that I've read more than once, because I just feel like it really resonates with me. But honestly, a lot of the mental game books you're going to find are the same. They all talk about the same topic, just in a little bit of a different way. Some of them are going to be more fictional and they'll tell a story, and some of them might be a little bit more nonfiction. Darren Donnelly has a series of maybe 7 books that I've read all of them, and I think they're all fantastic. So if somebody is kind of starting to look into things, I would start with him as an author and With Winning in Mind. A lot of people like the book In a Game of Tennis, but I personally never got on with it. And that just shows that you have to experiment and you have to try different things to see what works for you. If you don't like reading, which I used to hate reading, I actually started with audiobooks. So that was how I kind of got into things. Now podcasts are so huge that you can kind of listen to them as you were driving, but I used to listen to audiobooks, and then I started reading them.
I think it's kind of undervalued how important stuff away from the lanes is. I mean, I hated reading. Like, I still don't like it, but I was literally a few months ago, I was bowling in a competition. I really struggled with my mental game. And I got, there's a guy called Adam Kens who lives up here near me, does a bit of coaching me, and he literally turned around and went, "Get this book. It's called Learn to Win by Dr. Morris something." And I've like nearly read it all. And it's the first book I've like nearly finished. But I feel like the stuff that you can take away from these are so undervalued, because a lot of people that bowl don't do the extra stuff and put in the extra time off the lane. And, could you sort of vouch for the fact that putting in all these extracurricular activities and other stuff like that to improve yourself, like, you spend a lot of time in the gym, how much do you think that can help you as a bowler?
I like to believe that all of the extra stuff is important, right? Otherwise I wouldn't do it. I think that we can't just go and throw shots. There is more to that if we want to be at the top level. If you looked at any other professional athlete in any other sport, you would expect them to be focusing on their nutrition. You would expect them to work in the gym. And I don't think that bowling is any different. So for me, all of those extra elements become important. And the mental game, it's okay to read the books, but then it's about what do you do with the information that you are getting from those books. In the end, it's all about putting those elements into practice. From a fitness standpoint, I think that's very underrated. A lot of people don't realize how important fitness is for bowling. And that's something, it's a message that's very hard to reach people, because even myself, when we were in college, we were required to work out a certain amount of days a week. And I did it because we were told to do it. I didn't do it because I truly felt like it was going to benefit my game. Whereas now that's what motivates me. I know that if I go to the gym, I'm doing it because it's going to better myself, which is only going to help me on the lanes.
You've got a unique perspective in that you bowl both in the UK extensively and also the US. What's your perception on the attitude towards the mental game in the US as opposed to the UK? Do you think there's any difference?
I don't think so. I think that everyone struggles with it, but doesn't work on it. A lot of people say, I have a bad mental game, but they don't know what that means. All they say is, my mental game is bad. But I don't think anyone does the work to figure out what about their mental game is bad, because there are so many different elements. You know, like for me, my confidence was really bad, and I felt like that was one of the things that was holding me back from winning. But a lot of people won't say that it's confidence that they struggle with. They just say, as a general, mental game is bad, but then just continue week in and week out to be negative towards themselves and to not do anything about it. And I think that's a worldwide issue. But I also think that there is an abundance of information out there to work on it, but it only applies if you go out there and you get the information. And that's like anything, right? A lot of people don't go to the gym, but they could go to the gym. They just choose not to.
Do you think that the issue with the implementation of the mental game is exactly that? It's a lot of these books talk about things in general, talk about it from a theoretical perspective, but don't actually tell you how to do things. Do you think that is part of the problem?
I don't think so, because I think a lot of the books do tell you. I think a lot of the books give you the techniques to try, but a lot of people are just afraid to do it. And it takes a commitment, because it doesn't just happen overnight. If I tell myself, oh, I'm going to focus on positive self-talk, and I do it once, it's not going to achieve anything. So I think sometimes when people don't see instant results, they give up on something. And that's where they don't trust the process. And it becomes a lot harder because it doesn't happen right away. And a lot, you know, we want that. We want to go to the gym once and feel like a bodybuilder.
Just going on to sponsors now. I mean, on your website, you've got quite a long list of different sponsors. How important are those sponsors to what you do? And you know, when did you get your first sponsorship?
Very important, and I'm very appreciative of the support that I have from the bowling industry. For me, without them, it would become a lot harder, right? I'm sponsored by Storm, so I have the ability to get bowling balls. If I had to pay for the amount of bowling balls that I receive, I wouldn't be able to do it. And even on the women's tour, we have, if you're sponsored, you have the ability to drill bowling balls. Now we pay to drill the bowling ball, but we don't pay for the bowling ball itself. So the support like that is what makes the difference, because the equipment is so important in today's day and age. If I'm throwing a ball that's 10 years old versus I'm throwing a ball that's brand new, well, my carry is going to be different for one. So from that aspect, it is very important. When I was in college, I signed my first ball contract. And it was actually a European contract. I was working for Steve Thornton in a pro shop during the summers when I came back home to the UK. And through that, I was able to get a European contract that gave me a few bowling balls a year. And then once I graduated university, my contract changed a little bit.
How many balls do you think you get to in a season?
That is a really good question. In a whole year, I'd probably drill around 50 to 60 bowling balls.
You drill them yourself?
My boyfriend drills them for me.
Oh, okay.
I could drill them. I know how to drill, but he works for Kegel, and from a liability standpoint, it's better if I'm not drilling.
I know it sounds daft, but I spend a lot of time in my pro shop to try and learn from the people in there. And they were speaking about it, and there's one or two guys in there who are more than capable of drilling their own balls, but for some reason they prefer to get someone else to lay out and drill their own balls. Is that I don't really understand the reason behind it. I mean, is there a reason for you?
No,
is it just you just don't want to drill it?
I don't really enjoy drilling bowling balls. It doesn't give me any form of enjoyment. And I also doubt myself and my abilities. So I feel like I would have to practice quite a lot in order to feel good enough at drilling bowling balls. I can lay them out, no problem, but I would much rather not actually drill them. And that's more of just me being scared that I'm going to mess up my own bowling ball. So perhaps that's how other people feel too. When you're, I have trust in someone that I know is very good at doing it. And I would much rather him get it right than me get it wrong.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think having that trust in whoever is drilling your balls is really important. I mean, for me especially, it's if my pro shop guy says, do this, don't do this, I'm just like, yeah, we'll do that. Like, I have the trust in him that whatever I'm getting told by him is the best thing for me.
Yeah, I do think it's important to still have an understanding. So I still choose my layouts and I just tell him, and we talk about things like we have a very good, he understands my game very well. He understands everything. So we're on the same page, but he still wants me to say, hey, what layout are you having on that bowling ball? And I think as you are learning and growing as a bowler, that's something that's really important for you to learn is more about the bowling balls and the layouts. And if you just hand a ball to someone and have them do it all, and then you just take the ball and you throw it, you don't get as much of a deeper understanding versus if you're deciding on, okay, I want this one to be pinned down, you have to think about, well, why do you want that one to be pinned down? So the more information that you start to learn, one, the more overwhelming it becomes, but in the end, that knowledge is going to be power. And the more knowledge you have, the better educated guesses you're going to be able to make on the lane. And in the end, that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. I suppose if, obviously, you're understanding, I feel like what a lot of people lack, and it is, it's a difficult thing to learn because there's so much different things to look at when you're bowling. I mean, I always used to think, oh, it's how much your ball's hooking. It's, is your ball hooking too much, not enough? And then as I kind of got a bit more experienced in like bowling, European events bowling in America, you then sort of learn that it's not just that. You want to look at the way your ball's rolling, and there's all these different things that I think some people, kind of take for granted. The things that the best bowlers in the world look at, to whether they're throwing the right ball, is something that a lot of amateur bowlers or people looking to go professional don't even consider as that could be a thing to look at.
Yeah, 100%. Bowling is very technical and a lot of people don't have that understanding. Sometimes that's a good thing because it can become too overwhelming and sometimes you do have so many thoughts running through your head. But at the same time, the more knowledge we have, like I said before, the better educated that decision making will be on the lanes, right? If I'm deciding what bowling balls to take to a tournament, well, if I have the information about the bowling center and the lane pattern, then it's going to be easier to choose which bowling balls to take. There is just so much that goes into it, even from a surface standpoint, surface on the bowling ball, surface like lane surface, topography. There are way more elements than even I knew growing up, right? And I would say that growing up, I worked a lot more on physical game than I did on the lane play side of things. And that's something that I wish I had learned at a younger age. Something that I realized maybe a year ago was that growing up, I used to practice without pins. And that was just how we bowled in the UK. Like if I practiced, there was no pins. I just wasn't a thing. But it made me realize that, well, I never then paid attention to my ball going through the pins because I didn't have the pins. And then I kind of had this like revelation of, that's why it's so like it. I almost had to learn that when I moved to the US. Like, yes, I would bowl tournaments in the UK and I should be looking for it, but I didn't know to look for it.
How important, though, and how much of an advantage has it given you living within fairly close proximity of the Kegel Training Centre?
I like to think a lot. I mean, there is so much knowledge in that building that I feel like I'm always surrounded by greatness in that sense. I believe that they allow me to learn more about the lanes. I mean, they literally make the lane machines there. So for me, having the understanding of how a lane machine works, how an oil pattern is on the lane, all of that information to me is huge in becoming a better bowler. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't learn that stuff without being there. Of course you can. But it's just that I am so surrounded by it that it's always around me.
If you're not a professional bowler, do you think it's a benefit for a bowler to go to the Kegel Training Centre and take a training session or two there?
I think so. I mean, I have worked with all of the coaches there, and I just think that they have a very good way of explaining everything from a physical game fundamental element to the mental game to the lane play. I think that they give you a lot of information in one to be able to then go home and work on your game. And I see a lot of people that come in for lessons, and everyone's always extremely happy because they learn something that they feel like blows their minds, and they're able to, again, now everyone has phones, everyone tends to film themselves, but a lot of people don't know what they're looking for. They watch themselves on a video and they're like, okay, like they see themselves bowl and that's it. So I think it's nice to have that guidance. And I think that anyone that is a bowler that wants to get better, I think everyone should have a coach, right? It doesn't mean that you're seeing that coach every single week, but I think that you have to have somebody that you trust in that can help you and give you more information about your own game.
Yeah, I mean, in your bowling journey, it's like any bowlers, that you have these periods of time where you feel like you're plateaued, you're going nowhere. In fact, you think you're going backwards sometimes, and then all of a sudden, then progress restarts. I mean, you've been bowling for what, 24 years now or something like that. Do you find that continues to happen even now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that bowling is a roller coaster, and I think we would experience that in other sports too. Like, you're always going to feel like you're bowling great, and then all of a sudden you bowl bad, and then it's kind of like this up and down process. But it's like I said before, without those downs, I don't think we have the highs. So I think you actually need those low parts or the events that aren't as successful so that you can learn and grow to then have the successful event.
Yeah, so to be a good winner, effectively, you've got to be a good loser.
100%. You think about, even if you look at the NBA or, Tiger Woods, like they lose way more than they win. So if you look at some of the greatest of all time who have set records for the amount of events that they have won, and then you look at, the people who are below them, well, they've won even less, which means they've lost even more.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing surprised me, I mean, we were in Vegas a few years ago, and Jason Belmonte was there, and he was talking to everybody, telling us about his game, and he said his win rate was something like 11%, and I thought I'd misheard that, but no, I'm sure that's what he said. It was 11%, and to me, I would have, if somebody had asked me to guess what his win rate was, I would have maybe put 50-60% or something like that. So bowling is a strange sort of game. I mean, I know from I've been bowling for 35 years. It's a strange sort of game in that you can't really predict, what one game you can be bowling 250, next game it could be 150. And for me personally, I've always wondered why there's that discrepancy from one game to another. You can be on fire on one game, then it changes to another game. And it's like you're a different person. It's like something's changed. And I've never been able to understand that, but do you still experience that too?
Well, there are so many things that we can't control, and a lot of times that's why those games happen. But for most of the time, it just comes down to ball motion. The lanes are changing every single frame, so that transition is constantly happening. So there's a combination of things that it can be. It can be the fact that you need to make a move, you need to make a ball change, but it also could be a mental element in the fact of you've just shot 250. Now you're trying so hard to repeat that because you don't want to shoot the 150. So of course you end up shooting the 150.
So you spoke about coaching and how you worked for SCAD for a little bit. I'm just curious how you got into coaching. Was that something you always kind of wanted to do, or did you kind of fall into it?
It started when I came to Weber, and I learned a lot from the coaches here. So when I then would come back to the UK in the summers, I obviously was constantly bowling. I was helping Steve in the pro shop, and I started to do some help with the youth bowling club. And I did, a few like mini clinics for some of the kids because I wanted to be able to kind of teach what I was learning in the US. So that was where it all started. And then I actually went through and did my USBC bronze certification whilst I was in college. And I felt like I always just had this enjoyment in giving back and trying to help people and see them improve. I think that I have always enjoyed that. So it really started whilst I was at Weber, and then obviously I transitioned into working for SCAD.
So is it something you kind of see as a way to offset obviously your bowling fees, because the PWBA season only lasts 3 months, or do you see it as maybe like a career after you finish bowling?
A little bit of both. So right now I do some online coaching. I don't do much coaching in person unless it's actually a clinic, or if I'm traveling to do some coaching. I coach virtually online, which is a very different concept. It's something that I started during COVID, and I'm really happy that I did start because it's given me an avenue to give back and work with a lot of people that I wouldn't be able to work with in person just because everyone lives all over the place. So I have that. And yes, I think possibly in the future it could be an avenue for a career. However, I want to keep bowling for as long as possible. So I know that coaching is always going to be there, and I know that I'm always going to want to give back to the sport. But in terms of a full-time position or a full-time job right now, I don't see myself doing that so long as I can sustain what I'm currently doing.
So for anyone that's looking to sort of maybe get coached by you, can you explain how it works being coached obviously online? Because for me, the only thing I've ever known is, you go to the bowling center and you're a coach.
Yeah, it's definitely very different. The way I do it is each individual sends me some videos, normally a behind and a side view. I will then review those videos, and we actually set up a Zoom call. Now that Zoom call is not at the bowling center or anything like that. It's just a Zoom call at home, and we talk about what I see on those videos. Most of the time I'm sharing my screen with the person so that way we can, look at their bowling game together. And what I normally do, especially on the first call, is I just give an overview of what I see, because I want everybody to have an understanding themselves so that when they look at their own game, they also understand what I'm seeing. And then, I end up giving 1 or 2 things to work on, and I do a call with them every month. So that way they have about 4 weeks to work on what we've spoken about. They send me videos throughout the month. We talk throughout the month about how things are going. Some people I create practice plans for, and then we touch base with another Zoom call in a month, and we kind of review the changes that have happened.
So for anyone interested in that, how much would they be looking at paying to do something along those lines?
It's $55 a month. So that's like £45, I guess, around that. And it is set up as a subscription model to where, each month you come back and we do a call. But for some people, that doesn't also have to be the case. There's no like contract involved or anything. So if people just want to try it for a month, they can also do that.
So obviously, you're only 29. You've got at least over 20 years on the PWBA, maybe even longer. I don't think there's like a PBA 50 for women's bowling yet.
Not specifically for women, but the women can compete in the men's events. So the women could bowl the PBA 50. I think Liz Johnson this year is actually going to compete in some of the PBA 50 events as well as some PWBA events.
Is there any sort of thing already that sort of stands out for, I want to achieve this by the time I finish bowling?
No, I haven't. My ultimate goal, like I've always said, was to become a world champion. But that becomes a little bit difficult when we don't always, it's not like there is a world championships every year to be able to compete in. So I think I just want to be the best in the world.
So obviously everyone has a life away from bowling. Some people do all sorts of stuff, and some people, the life is just bowling. for you, is your life just bowling, or do you do anything outside of it?
My life is very bowling heavy. I do things, but I feel like most of the things that I do are still focused towards improving bowling. So like fitness, like right now I'm doing a lot of yoga. I walk, like walking is a hobby, but it's also a way to stay in shape to help me with bowling. So I don't necessarily have these like fun hobbies that I do. Everything is very bowling focused at the moment.
Normally on these podcasts, we ask the guest to recommend or to nominate somebody else to come on a future podcast. So if we ask you that question, who would you nominate?
You know, I was actually thinking about this because I know who nominated me. But I think my pick is Steve Thornton. I think that he would be he has a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, and a lot of history within UK bowling.
Okay, well, that's a job for you. You can contact Steve Thornton and see if you can get him on. Verity, it's been great. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And it's been really interesting in some of the things that you've told us. You've answered some questions for me personally, which I've often wondered, especially from a perspective of a British person going over to the US and making a success of it. So it's been really interesting. So thank you for your time. We wish you the best of luck in the PWBA and, of course, achieving your ultimate goal as being a world champion. And I'm sure you'll get there eventually if keep that mental game going.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me. And I appreciate what you're doing and trying to spread the word for bowling. I think that is super important. So I hope you both can keep doing this, keep speaking to some interesting guests, and I wish you all the best.
Yeah, as long as we can get guests, then we'll still be here. So that's the end of this edition of the SpareTime podcast. It's sponsored by ADR Wear. If you like what you've seen and what you heard today, put some comments below, click on the like, or just simply subscribe. So from me, Nigel, and from him, Ben, it's goodbye, and we'll see you next time.